Ambassador Jelvan had been watching humans for 3 standard years, and she still did not understand them at all. She sat in her observation vessel high above the human colony called New Providence, her 4 eyes scanning the settlement below with growing confusion, and her long fingers moved across her data console as she recorded her daily notes for the Galactic Council back home. The Council had sent her here because they wanted to learn about this strange new species that had recently joined the stars. And what she had found was the most puzzling creature in all her centuries of study. Humans were soft and weak and small compared to most species in the galaxy. Yet they had somehow spread across dozens of worlds in just a few generations. They cried when they were sad and laughed when they were happy. They wrote poetry about sunsets and sang songs to their young ones before sleep. They kept animals as companions and talked to plants as if the plants could hear them. Jelvan had watched a human male spend an entire afternoon trying to rescue a small creature that had fallen into a drainage pipe. And when he finally pulled the tiny animal free, he had wept with joy. These were not the behaviors of a dangerous species. She had concluded the Corvade people who had sent her were ancient and wise and careful. They had seen empires rise and fall across 10,000 years. They knew that the galaxy was full of predators and prey, and they wanted to know which category humans belonged to after 3 years of study. Jelvan was ready to file her final report. Humans were harmless, emotional, easily distracted creatures who posed no threat to anyone. But that was before the Varax came. The warning signals screamed through her ship, just as the sun was setting over New Providence. And Jelvan nearly fell from her chair as 3 massive shapes tore through the sky above the colony. She knew those ships. Every species in the galaxy knew those ships. The Varax were hunters, killers, monsters who traveled from world to world taking whatever they wanted. Their bodies were covered in hard black shells, and their claws could cut through metal. They had 6 legs and 4 arms and mouths full of teeth that never stopped growing. They called themselves the Swarm. And they had destroyed civilizations older than humanity before humans had even learned to make fire. Jelvan immediately activated her cloaking systems and began recording. The Council would want to see this. They would want to document how another young species met its end at the hands of the Varax. She expected panic. She expected screaming and chaos and desperate attempts to flee. She had seen it happen on other worlds, and it was always the same terrible story. But the humans did something she had never seen before. They stopped. Every single human in the colony simply stopped whatever they were doing. The farmers in the fields stood up straight. The children in the schoolyard went silent. The scientists in their laboratories put down their instruments for exactly 7 seconds. Not a single human moved or spoke. Then they began to change. Jelvan watched with growing horror as the soft, emotional creatures she had studied for 3 years transformed into something else entirely. The smiles disappeared from their faces. Their eyes went hard and cold and empty. Their shoulders squared and their backs straightened. They moved differently now, like water flowing around stones. Smooth and purposeful and utterly silent. A human female who had been laughing with her children just moments before knelt down and whispered something to them. The children nodded and ran toward the central shelter without a single tear or cry of fear. The female then turned and walked toward the armory with the same calm expression on her face. And as she walked, she tied her hair back and rolled up her sleeves, as if she were preparing for a day of hard work rather than a battle for survival. Commander Elena Vasquez stood in the center of the colony and watched her people move. She had been a soldier for 19 years and a mother for 12, and she knew exactly what was happening inside the hearts of everyone around her. The fear was there. It was always there. But humans had learned long ago how to put fear in a box and lock it away until the danger had passed. She remembered her grandmother telling her stories about the old days on Earth. about the times when humans had hunted creatures 10 times their size across endless plains, following them for days and days until the creatures simply collapsed from exhaustion. "We are not the fastest," her grandmother had said, "and we are not the strongest. But we are the most patient. We never stop. We never give up. We follow and follow and follow until our prey has nothing left to give." Alana had thought those were just stories. She had thought that part of humanity had faded away in the centuries of peace and civilization. She had been wrong. She felt it now, rising up from somewhere deep inside her, something ancient and cold and absolutely ruthless. It was not anger, not hatred, not even fear. It was something simpler and more dangerous than any of those things. It was focus. The Varak ships were landing in the fields outside the colony, and she could see the first warriors emerging from the hatches. They were massive and terrible, moving on 6 legs with their claws raised and their mouths open and screaming battle cries. They expected the humans to run. Every species ran from the Varaks. That was simply how things worked in the galaxy. Elena watched them come and felt nothing but a cold, quiet certainty. These creatures had come to take her children, her people, her home. They thought humans were prey, because humans were small and soft and cried. And sad stories, they were about to learn how wrong they were. She lifted her communicator and spoke to the entire colony in a voice that was flat and calm and completely without emotion. She did not need to shout or inspire or motivate. Every human who heard her already knew what needed to be done. "They want our children," she said. "They want our home. They think we are prey." She paused and watched the Varak's army spreading out across the fields. Thousands of chitinous warriors who had conquered 100 worlds. "Show them what we are." High above the colony, Jelvan transmitted everything to the council with trembling hands. Her message was simple and urgent and filled with a fear she had never felt before in her long life. "Something is wrong," she wrote. "The humans are not running. They are not surrendering. I do not know what they are doing, but I am afraid. I am very, very afraid." The sun finished setting over New Providence, and the first Varak's warriors charged toward the colony walls with their claws gleaming in the darkness. They never saw the humans smiling in the shadows, patient and silent and waiting. The children of New Providence sat in the central shelter and did not cry. This was perhaps the strangest thing that Jelvan had ever witnessed, and she had seen many strange things in her 400 years of life. Young ones of every species she had ever studied would scream and weep when danger came. It was natural. It was normal. It was how the universe worked, but these human children sat in perfect silence with their hands folded in their laps. And when the sounds of battle began outside, they simply looked at each other and nodded as if they understood. Something that Jelvan could not comprehend, an elderly human female moved among them, handing out water and small pieces of food, and she spoke to them in a low and steady voice that never wavered even when explosions shook the walls of the shelter. "Your parents are keeping you safe," she said. "This is what humans do. We protect our young. We have always protected our young. It is why we are still here after all these thousands of years." Outside the shelter, the battle had begun in earnest, and it was not going the way the Varaks had expected. The first wave of warriors had charged the colony walls with absolute confidence. They had done this 1,000 times on 100 different worlds. They knew exactly how this was supposed to go. Defenders would panic and scatter. The gates would fall within minutes. The harvest would begin before dawn. It was simple. It was easy. It was what the Varaks did best, but the humans did not scatter. They did not even seem afraid. They simply waited behind their walls, with weapons raised and eyes cold and empty. When the first Varaks reached the gates, a human male, stepped out of the shadows and put 3 rounds into its central nerve cluster before it could even raise its claws. The warrior fell without a sound, and the human had already moved to his next target before the body hit the ground commander. Vasquez watched from the command post and felt the ancient thing inside her growing stronger with every passing moment. She could see everything happening across the colony through the camera feeds. And what she saw made her proud. Her people were not fighting like civilians. They were not fighting like soldiers. They were fighting like something older and more dangerous than either of those things a farmer named Thomas Chun had positioned himself in the bell tower of the old church with a hunting rifle that had belonged to his grandfather. He had never been in a war. He had never killed anything larger than a deer. But when the Varax came through the eastern gate, he began firing with a calm precision that would have impressed the finest military snipers. He did not waste ammunition. He did not miss. He simply put each round exactly where it needed to go, one after another, until the eastern approach was littered with fallen warriors in the medical center. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo had organized her staff into a field hospital that ran with brutal efficiency. Wounded humans came in through one door, received treatment, and went out through another to rejoin the fight. No one complained about pain. Number 1 asked to rest. They simply patched themselves up and went back to work. One young woman had taken a Varax claw through her left shoulder, a wound that would have left most species screaming in agony. Dr. Okonkwo watched in amazement as the woman simply gritted her teeth and held still while the wound was cleaned and bandaged. "How bad is it?" the woman asked. "You will lose some mobility in that arm." The doctor replied. The woman nodded and picked up her weapon with her right hand. "Good enough," she said, and walked back out into the night. Salvan recorded everything with growing disbelief. Her instruments showed her things that made no sense at all. Human heart rates were actually decreasing as the battle went on. Their stress hormones were dropping. Their brain activity was shifting into patterns she had never seen before. They were becoming calmer as the danger increased. This was the opposite of every survival instinct that evolution had ever produced. Every species in the galaxy became more panicked as threats grew more severe. That was how biology worked. That was how the universe worked, but humans seemed to operate under different rules entirely. The Varax commanders began to notice that something was wrong. Their warriors were falling at rates that should have been impossible. The soft pink creatures were not running or hiding or begging for mercy. Instead, the humans were advancing. Small teams of 3 or 4 had begun moving beyond the walls, slipping through the darkness like ghosts, appearing behind Varax positions and striking without warning before vanishing again. A Varax captain turned to face an enemy behind him and found nothing but empty shadows. When he turned back, a human was standing right in front of him with a blade in her hand and a smile on her face that showed all her teeth. He had seen that expression before, long ago in the hunting grounds of his homeworld. It was the expression of a predator that knew its prey had nowhere left to run. The human female moved faster than he would have believed possible. And the last thing the captain saw was her eyes. Cold and empty and utterly without mercy. Commander Vasquez received reports from all across the colony, and each one told the same story. Her people were winning, but more than that, they were hunting. Understood now what was happening. The ancient instincts that humans had buried under centuries of civilization were waking up. The thing that had made their ancestors chase mammoths across frozen plains and track lions through burning savannas was rising to the surface. Humans were not ambush predators like the Varax. They did not strike and retreat. They did not hide and wait. Humans were pursuit predators. They followed. They tracked. They never stopped and never tired. They simply kept coming until their prey collapsed from exhaustion and fear. The Varax had conquered 100 worlds because they were the most terrifying hunters in the galaxy. They had never met a species that hunted back until now. High above the battle, Gelvan sent another message to the council. Her words were urgent and frightened and filled with a terrible new understanding. "I was wrong about them," she wrote. "I was so very wrong. They are not prey. They have never been prey. They simply choose not to hunt most of the time. But when something threatens their young, when something attacks their home, they become something else entirely." She paused and watched a group of humans chase a retreating Varax patrol into the forest, moving through the trees with silent purpose. "They become patient," she continued. "And I am beginning to think that patience might be the most dangerous thing in the universe." Below her, the humans of New Providence continued their work, and the night was filled with the screams of hunters who had suddenly become the hunted. The sun rose over New Providence on the second day, and the Varax commanders could not understand what had happened to their army. They had landed with 40,000 warriors, the finest hunters their species had ever produced, veterans of 100 conquests who had never known defeat. They had expected to be loading human captives into their ships by now, preparing them for the long journey to the breeding farms where soft species were turned into food and labor. Instead, they had lost nearly 8,000 warriors in a single night, and the humans were still fighting. War leader Krathax stood on the bridge of his hive ship and studied the reports with growing fury. This was not possible. This could not be happening. The humans were supposed to be weak and frightened and easy to break, but every patrol he sent into forest came back smaller than when it left. Every assault on the colony walls was pushed back with brutal efficiency. Every trap his hunters set was somehow discovered and turned against them. And worst of all, the humans were following his warriors. A Varax hunting party had retreated into the hills to the north, thinking they could regroup and plan their next attack. Instead, they found themselves being tracked by a single human male who simply would not stop for 6 hours. The human followed them. He did not run. He did not charge. He simply walked at a steady pace, always staying just within sight, always watching with those cold, empty eyes. The Varax were faster over short distances. They could sprint and climb and leap in ways that humans could not. But every time they stopped to rest, the human appeared again, closer than before, still walking, still watching. By the time the sun rose, the Varax hunters were exhausted and terrified. Their legs ached, and their lungs burned, and their minds were filled with a fear they had never experienced before. The human was not even breathing hard. He got up to them in a small valley as they tried to find water, and he killed all 7 of them in less than 3 minutes. Then he drank from the stream, washed the blood from his hands, and walked back toward the colony to find more prey. Gelvan watched this happen through her long-range sensors and felt her understanding of the universe shift beneath her. She had studied predators her entire life. She knew how they worked. They used speed and strength and surprise to overwhelm their victims, but humans did not hunt like that at all. They hunted with time. They simply refused to give up. They followed and followed and followed until their prey had nothing left. She researched human evolution in her ship's database and found something that made her blood run cold. Humans had evolved on a planet full of animals that were faster and stronger than they were. They should have been prey. They should have been food for the great cats and wolves and bears that shared their world. But humans had discovered a terrible secret. Almost every animal in existence could only run for short periods before it needed to rest, but humans could run forever. Human ancestors had chased their prey for hours and hours under the burning sun until the animals simply collapsed from heat and exhaustion. Then the humans would walk up to them slowly and finish them with simple tools. It was called persistence hunting. And it was the most patient and terrifying form of killing that evolution had ever produced. Now the humans of New Providence were doing the same thing to the Varax. Commander Vasquez coordinated her forces from the command center with quiet efficiency. She had divided her people into hunting packs of 4 to 8 members, each with a specific territory to patrol and protect. They communicated through hand signals and short radio bursts. Moving through the forest like shadows, she did not need to give many orders. Her people already knew what to do. The ancient instincts were guiding them, teaching them things that no training program could ever provide. A group of teachers from the colony school had become the most effective tracking team. They moved through the underbrush without making a sound, following Varax trails with an accuracy that seemed almost supernatural. When they found their prey, they struck fast and hard, and then melted back into the forest before reinforcements could arrive. The farmers worked in teams to defend the food supplies and water sources. They knew this land better than any invader ever could. They had planted every seed and dug every irrigation ditch. Now they used that knowledge to set traps and ambush that the Varax never saw coming. Even the elderly found ways to contribute. A 73-year-old grandmother named Margaret had positioned herself in a hidden bunker with a communication relay and a detailed map of the colony. She tracked every Varax movement and guided the hunting teams to their targets with calm precision. 3 warriors moving through Grid 7, she would say in a voice that sounded like she was reading a recipe. Team 4, intercept at the old mill. Team 6, block the retreat path through the river valley. The Varax died by the dozens, then by the hundreds, and they could not understand why. War leader Krathax ordered his warriors to stay together in large groups for protection, but this only made them easier to track and surround. He ordered them to attack the colony in force, but the humans simply pulled back and let them exhaust themselves against the walls before counterattacking. Nothing worked. Nothing helped. The soft pink creatures were everywhere and nowhere, patient and relentless and absolutely unstoppable. On the 3rd day, Krathax made a decision that no Varax commander had made in over 1,000 years. He ordered a retreat. His remaining warriors began pulling back toward the hive ships, fighting desperate rearguard actions against human hunting parties that seemed to appear from nowhere. For every step they retreated, they lost more soldiers. Jelvim watched the Varax flee and transmitted her observations to the council with a mixture of awe and terror. She had seen many battles in her long life, but she had never seen anything like this. They broke the Varax, she wrote. These soft creatures who cry at sad stories and keep animals as friends. These beings who make art and music and spend hours watching sunsets. They broke the most feared hunters in the galaxy. She paused and watched a group of humans emerge from the forest to stand at the edge of the colony, watching the Varax retreat with cold satisfaction. But they are not finished, she continued. I can see it in their eyes. The hunt is not over. They will not stop until every last Varax is gone. Below her, Commander Vasquez stood among her people and felt the ancient thing inside her demanding more. The enemy was running, yes, but running was not the same as defeated. As long as the Varax ships remained in orbit, the threat remained. She looked at the faces around her, at the farmers and teachers and scientists who had become hunters, and she saw the same cold certainty in every one of them. They were not going to let the Varax leave. The humans found the feeding pens on the morning of the 4th day, and something changed inside them that Jelvan could not explain. A scouting team had been tracking a group of retreating Varax through the eastern forest when they discovered a large clearing that the aliens had been using as a staging area. There were supply crates and communication equipment and temporary shelters scattered across the ground, but in the center of the clearing, there were cages. They were large metal structures with thick bars and heavy locks, designed to hold creatures roughly the size of adult humans. The floors were covered with dirty straw, and the walls were marked with scratches and stains. That told a terrible story. These were the holding pens. This was where the Varax kept their prey before loading them onto the ships. This was where the humans of New Providence would have spent their final days if the invasion had succeeded. The scouting team stood in silence and looked at the cages. And something inside them went very still and very cold. They had been fighting for survival before. They had been defending their homes and protecting their children. But this was different. This was proof of what the Varax had planned for them. This was evidence that they were not seen as enemies to be defeated, but as livestock to be harvested. The aliens had built these pens with casual efficiency, the same way a farmer might build a cattle enclosure, never doubting that they would be filled. The team leader, a quiet man named James, who had been an accountant before the invasion, took several photographs and sent them back to Commander Vasquez without saying a word within an hour. Every human in the colony had seen those images. Jalvan watched the humans gather in the central square and felt fear rising in her hearts. Something was changing. The cold focus that had guided them through the battle was transforming into something darker and more dangerous. They were not angry. Anger would have been understandable. Anger would have been normal. There was something beyond anger, something that Jalvan had no word for in any of the languages. She spoke. Commander Vasquez stood before her people and looked at the faces around her. She saw the same expression on every one of them. It was not rage or hatred or desire for revenge. It was something simpler and more terrible. It was resolve. These creatures had come to their world and built cages for their children. They had planned to take human beings and turn them into meat. They had looked at fathers and mothers and sons and daughters and seen nothing but food. There would be no mercy now. There would be no survivors. There would be no records that this swarm had ever existed. Vasquez spoke in a voice that was barely above a whisper, but every human heard her clearly. Tonight we take their ships. Tonight we end this. No prisoners. No one cheered. No one shouted. They simply nodded and began to prepare. The Varax had pulled most of their remaining forces back to defend the 3 hive ships. War leader Krathex believed that the thick armor and powerful weapons of his vessels would protect his warriors until they could escape into hyperspace. He was wrong. The humans attacked at midnight, moving through the darkness in small teams that had been practicing together for 3 days. They did not charge or assault or storm the ships with overwhelming force. They infiltrated. Small groups of humans slipped past the Varax perimeter guards, using skills that seemed almost supernatural. They moved without sound. They left no tracks. They seemed to melt into the shadows. Zemzirin tracked them with her sensors and could barely believe what she was seeing. These were not soldiers or special forces or trained assassins. These were ordinary colonists, farmers and teachers and scientists who had learned to hunt in just 4 days. But humans have been hunters for millions of years. The skills were written into their very genes. All they needed was a reason to remember. The first hive ship fell in silence. The humans had found the fuel systems and placed their charges with careful precision. When the explosions began, they were already moving toward the second ship. War leader Krathax stood on the bridge of his command vessel and watched in horror as flames erupted from the first ship. He screamed orders at his warriors, demanding that they find the attackers and stop them, but his warriors were dying in the darkness. Picked off one by hunters they never saw coming, a Varax guard would be standing at his post one moment and gone the next, dragged into the shadows by hands that moved faster than he could react. His companions would turn to look for him and find only blood on the ground. Second ship began to burn just as Krathax ordered an emergency launch. He would sacrifice his remaining warriors on the ground if it meant escaping this nightmare world. But the humans had planned for that too. A team of engineers had spent the past 2 days studying the Varax ships with the colony's scanning equipment. They had found the weak points. They had calculated the angles. They had prepared for this exact moment as the third hive ship began to lift off the ground. A single human female named Chen Wei stood in the forest with a shoulder-mounted missile launcher that had been collecting dust in the colony armory for years. She took a breath and held it. She calculated the distance and the trajectory, and the exact point where the armor was thinnest. Then she fired. The missile struck the ship's main thruster array just as it cleared the tree line, and the explosion sent the massive vessel crashing back to the earth in a ball of flame. Zelvan watched the three ships burn and realized that her hands were shaking. She had seen wars before. She had witnessed the fall of empires and the death of worlds. But she had never seen anything like this. The humans stood in the fields below her, their faces illuminated by the fires, and not one of them looked away. They watched the ships burn with expressions of cold satisfaction. They watched their enemies die and felt nothing but the quiet certainty that they had done what needed to be done. Commander Vasquez stood among her people and felt the ancient thing inside her beginning to settle. The threat was ended. The hunt was over. Her children were safe, but she knew that something had changed in all of them. They had discovered what they truly were beneath the poetry and music and art. They had found the predator that lived inside every human heart. It was not a comfortable knowledge. It was not a pleasant truth. But it was real, and they would carry it with them for the rest of their lives. The sun began to rise over New Providence, painting the sky in shades of gold and red, and the humans finally allowed themselves to breathe. Mothers ran to the shelter to hold their children. Fathers wept with relief. Friends embraced and thanked each other for surviving. They were soft again. They were emotional and kind and full of love. The predator had gone back to sleep, but it would never be forgotten. It would never truly be gone. It would always be there, waiting, ready to wake up if anything ever threatened their pack again. High above, Zhalvan began composing her final report to the Galactic Council, and her words were careful and precise and filled with a warning that she hoped they would understand. The great chamber of the Galactic Council had not been this full in over 200 years. Representatives from all 47 member species had gathered to witness Ambassador Zhalvan's report on the events at New Providence. They filled the circular hall from floor to ceiling. Thousands of eyes and sensors and other sensory organs all focused on the small Kalvathi female who stood at the central podium. Zhalvan had spent 3 weeks preparing this presentation. She had reviewed every recording, analyzed every data point, and consulted with the finest xenobiologists in the galaxy. She knew that what she was about to show them would change everything. Honored council members, she began, her voice steady despite the fear that still lived in her hearts. I was sent to observe humanity and determine whether they posed a threat to galactic civilization. I believed this would be a simple assignment. I was wrong. She activated the holographic display and showed them images of New Providence before the invasion. Humans laughing and playing with their children. Humans tending gardens and painting pictures. Humans singing songs around evening fires. This is what humans appear to be, she said. Soft, emotional creatures who form deep attachments to their young and even to animals of other species. They create art for no practical purpose. They tell stories to each other simply for the joy of hearing them. They weep at sad tales and laugh at funny ones. The council members shifted in their seats. They had seen similar species before. Such creatures rarely lasted long in a dangerous galaxy. Zhalvan changed the display to show the Vorax invasion. The 3 hive ships descending through the clouds. The 40,000 warriors spreading across the fields. The cages being assembled in the forest clearing. The Vorax came to harvest them, she continued. They expected easy prey. They had conquered 100 worlds with exactly this strategy. They had never failed. She paused and let the silence fill the chamber. They failed at New Providence. The display changed again, and now it showed the transformation that Zhalvan had witnessed. The humans going still and silent. the smiles disappearing, the cold, empty look that filled their eyes. "Watch carefully," she said. "Watch what happens when you threaten a human's children." The council watched in growing horror as the farmers became hunters and the teachers became killers. They saw the pursuit through the forest, the human male who followed his prey for 6 hours without rest. They saw the coordinated attacks and the silent communication and the absolute refusal to stop. "This is called persistence hunting," Gelvan explained. "Humans evolved as pursuit predators. They cannot run as fast as most prey animals, but they can run forever." Their ancestors would chase creatures for days across open plains until the animals collapsed from exhaustion. Then they would simply walk up and finish them. She showed them Dr. Okonko's medical records, the soldiers who came in with terrible wounds and walked back out to fight. She showed them the heart rate data, the inexplicable calm that settled over humans as the danger increased. "They do not panic under pressure," she said. "They become more focused, more efficient, more dangerous. The greater the threat, the colder they become." The display shifted to show the burning hive ships, the flames reflected in hundreds of human eyes. 40,000 Varax warriors reduced to ash by 12,000 colonists who had never been soldiers. The Varax sent their finest hunters to harvest a peaceful human colony, Gelvan said. Not a single Varax survived. Not one. The chamber erupted in murmurs and whispers. Some species were terrified. Others were skeptical. A few were quietly calculating how they might use this information. High Counselor Methra, an ancient being who had served the council for over 1,000 years, raised one massive limb for silence. When he spoke, his voice rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder. "Ambassador Gelvan, I have a question. If humans are such effective predators, why have we not seen this behavior before? They have been a spacefaring species for nearly 2 centuries. They have colonies on dozens of worlds. Yet they are known throughout the galaxy as a peaceful and friendly species." Gelvan nodded. She had expected this question. It was the most important one. "That is precisely what makes them so dangerous, High Counselor. Humans are predators, yes, but they are predators who have chosen not to hunt. They suppress their instincts constantly. They build their entire civilization around the idea of being gentle and kind and helpful." She brought up images of human children playing with pets, human artists creating beautiful paintings, human musicians performing for appreciative crowds. "This is not a mask," she said. "This is what they genuinely want to be. They take joy in creation rather than destruction. They prefer cooperation to conflict. They have worked hard for thousands of years to become something other than what their evolution made them." She paused and let her words sink in. "But the predator is still there. It is always there, sleeping just beneath the surface. And when something threatens their young, their families, their pack, it wakes up." The chamber was silent now. Even the whispers had stopped. "What we witnessed at New Providence was not humans becoming monsters," Gelvan continued. "It was humans temporarily setting aside the restraints they have placed on themselves. When the threat was ended, they returned to normal almost immediately. They held their children and wept with relief and began rebuilding their community." She looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives, making eye contact with as many as she could. "Humans are not dangerous because they are predators," she said. "They are dangerous because they choose every single day not to be. They have the capacity for terrible violence, but they prefer kindness. They could hunt and kill with devastating efficiency, but they would rather make music and tell stories. And that choice," she concluded, "is what makes them the most frightening species I have ever encountered. Because it means that the gentle creature who offers you friendship today could become your worst nightmare tomorrow if you give them a reason." High Counselor Methri was silent for a long moment, processing everything he had heard and seen. Then he spoke the words that would be recorded in the archives of 100 civilizations. The council will vote on the reclassification of humanity. The vote was unanimous. Humanity was removed from the Class 3 developing civilization category and placed in a new classification that had to be created specifically for them. Class 1 Apex Predator. Diplomatic status friendly. A warning was attached to their file. One that would be shared with every spacefaring species in the galaxy. It reads simply, "Do not provoke," but Jelvan added her own note to the official record. A personal observation that she hoped future generations would remember. She wrote it in the simple, clear language that she had learned from 3 years of watching humans. They are kind because they want to be. They are gentle because they choose to be. They are peaceful because they have decided that peace is better than war. But make no mistake about what they truly are. If you threaten their children, they will hunt you. If you attack their homes, they will find you. If you try to make them pray, they will teach you why that was the worst decision your species ever made. They are patient. They are relentless. They never stop and never give up. And somewhere deep inside every single one of them, there is a predator waiting to wake up. Treat them well. Be their friend. Show them kindness and they will show you wonders beyond imagination. But never, ever forget what they are capable of when they stop being kind. Far across the galaxy, on a small world called New Providence, Commander Elena Vasquez sat with her daughter on a hillside and watched the sunset paint the sky in beautiful colors. The child leaned against her mother and sighed contentedly. "Mommy," the girl asked, "why do the aliens seem scared of us now?" "We are not scary." Vasquez smiled and pulled her daughter close. She thought about all the things she could say, all the explanations she could give. But her daughter was young and innocent, and did not need to know about the darkness that lived inside every human heart. "We are not scary," she agreed. "We are just very, very good at protecting the people we love." The child accepted this answer and went back to watching the sunset. And Elena Vasquez held her tight and hoped that she would never have to explain the full truth. But if another threat ever came to their world, she knew exactly what she would do. She knew what every human would do. They would become patient. They would become relentless. They would become the most dangerous hunters the galaxy had ever seen, and they would not stop until their children were safe.